What's up, guys? It's Patricia from tarantulaheaven.com. Welcome back to the channel for Tarantula Tuesday. You guys can't see her right now, but right in her tunnel is Miss Spidey, and she is like right at the start of her tunnel, so I am hoping that she will do us the honor of coming out of her tunnel so that you guys can watch. Right now, just her little feet are sticking out, and she's just hanging out, so I hope she moves. But she looks really cozy right now, so I'm not sure if that's going to happen. Anyway, today I wanted to talk about overfeeding our tarantulas and maybe reasons why maybe we should be a little bit careful. This is not a video about power feeding. For those of you who don't know, power feeding is the practice that some tarantula owners will use where they purposely feed, usually the slings, very often, and they will feed them a lot just to try to get them out of the fragile sling stage or to have their tarantula develop faster than they normally would. This isn't about power feeding. This is more so just about maybe tarantula owners who are newer to tarantula keeping and may not really know what's a healthy rate of feeding their tarantula, or maybe tarantula owners who just keep feeding their tarantula until they stop accepting food. I'm not an expert in this. This is just based on my experiences, the research I've done, and what I've seen from others. And, you know, my situation is very different. I do not have hungry tarantulas. Spidey is a Grammostola rosea, and just like that species' reputation, she will fast for over a year at a time, or, you know, she'll eat for a few good months regularly. And when I say regularly, this means she's accepting meals maybe twice a month. She's not a big eater, never has been. And then she'll randomly, after a few months of some nice regular eating, she will just decide to stop eating for a year. And that will be regardless of whether she's in pre-molt or not. And my other tarantula, Blinky, who's an Arizona blonde, still very much a baby sling and has been for quite a while. They also are not a huge eater. There was a time where they were accepting food pretty regularly, but now that it's winter, they're in hibernation mood and they've been underground. And, you know, I try to throw a baby cockroach in there every few weeks and they're not eating them. So I don't know what's going on there. So anyway, so my tarantulas don't have a problem of overeating. However, I ended up learning quite a bit about this because I used to get a lot of comments on Spidey's Tumblr blog when I would post pictures of her. Because if you guys have ever seen Spidey, she is a beautiful full figure tarantula. She has always been very curvy, and she has just always had a really plump abdomen. The only time that her abdomen isn't fully plump is like right after a molt, and then once she starts drinking water and then eating, because usually after a molt is when she actually has a pretty great appetite, then she fattens right up again and she looks very hydrated. And so people used to always ask, like, that spider is really fat, you should stop feeding her. And little did they know, I hadn't been feeding her. I used to get comments about this even when Spidey was into a year-long fast. So she's just always been, I guess, a well-rounded spider. And so due to this, I ended up doing a lot of research about how to feed tarantulas and, you know, what's the healthiest diet. And that was kind of something that encouraged me to switch from superworms to cockroaches because of the lesser fat content. So I've done a bit of experimenting in this area. My tarantulas still aren't great eaters. Spidey is very elderly and, you know, she can always be in some type of fasting or pre-molt stage as a G. rosea. So her appetite's not very big. She does eat every once in a while, but it's not, I can't overfeed her basically because her hunger cues are just not there. But for some tarantulas, if you have a very hungry tarantula, there are some tarantulas who will just eat as much as you give them. Some tarantula species have very vivacious appetites, and, you know, people will say that in the wild, some tarantulas are very opportunistic. They will eat whenever they can because they don't know when their next meal is coming, and that makes a lot of sense. But for those of us who are keeping tarantulas in captivity, we have quite a bit more control over that, and we are responsible for our tarantulas' bodies and their diets and well-being. So I think that, you know, from what I've read and in the discussions that I've had with people, what I find, and this does really depend on the species as well as the spider, but it also matters where they are in their age or their life cycle. A tarantula who is getting ready to molt is probably not going to eat very much or be interested in eating at all, versus a tarantula who has just molted or, you know, has molted in the last week or two is really going to be ready for some food. So, and this also depends on what type of season are you in the country that you're in. Right here, it's winter on the East Coast in the US. And so the spiders aren't eating very much. They're not doing a whole lot. They are hibernating, or they're in their slow period. And then in spring and summer, usually I'll see them be more active, and they'll also be able to, they will actually be thankful for the attempts that I try to feed them. But anyway, this video is about tarantula obesity and why you maybe shouldn't overfeed your spider. I don't think it's necessarily directly harmful unless maybe it might cause a molting issue, but I am not sure of that. I think that spiders and tarantulas' bodies work so differently from ours that, you know, maybe there is no relationship between weight or size to their other systems, like their nervous systems, their circulatory systems, their cardiovascular systems. So that might not be a risk factor, but I will say that one of my biggest concerns for a tarantula that's really plump because they've been overfeeding is that it does make them more susceptible to injury. And I think that's the biggest concern, at least for me. For a tarantula who is either an arboreal or a tarantula that likes to just climb things in their tank, even if they're a terrestrial, sometimes our terrestrial tarantulas really like to climb their glass and pretend that they are an arboreal. So for a tarantula who has this kind of activity, they can actually get quite hurt because, as you know, tarantulas are fragile to begin with. Their abdomens can certainly burst or get ruptured or torn or hurt if they fall down from any kind of height, really. They're certainly very, very fragile and delicate. And so I've read that when you have a tarantula who has an abdomen that, you know, looks like it's about to burst already, and it's so stretched and plump, this could make the tarantula even more susceptible to having a life-threatening injury if it falls or gets cut or something like that. I guess the next point is in regards to imbalances in the body. I think anytime a tarantula has an issue, whether it's an injury, an imbalance in their body, some sort of tumor or infection on their exterior, I think any of these things can cause molting problems. And so I don't know this for sure, but I don't see why a nutrition imbalance or a tarantula who is overweight wouldn't maybe have a molting problem in the future. So I think that the safest thing is to keep your tarantula's diet and their feeding schedule really balanced. You know, if you are not into power feeding, like you're trying to get your spider out of the sling phase for a particular reason, there may not be any reason why you need to feed your tarantula until they're going to burst. Some of our tarantulas are very, very hungry and greedy, and they will just keep eating as long as we're putting food in the enclosure. But we want to make sure that we are not feeding them too much and too often. And this will really depend on your type of tarantula. There are some tarantula species that are just more hungry than others and have better appetites. It will also depend on the season where you are at. It will also depend on your spider's age and their size. There's multiple factors that go into this. So for tarantulas like mine, these are tarantulas that don't have all around the year feeding responses. They hibernate in the winter, they become very inactive, they're not interested. Some tarantulas might maintain a great appetite all throughout the year as long as their temperatures are regulated. Slings tend to eat more frequently or need to eat more frequently than older tarantulas. I think it's really common for you to feed them small feeders every few days because they need to grow, and they also molt more often too. So they're going through a lot as they're in those first few beginning stages. And then once they get a little bit older, like juvenile to adult, and then even more so when you get a tarantula like Spidey who's well into her grandma years, then you can really back off, and you feed them once a week, and maybe instead of 3 feeders, it's more like 1. Spidey does not eat once a week. I try once a month, and she's always been like that. So it really depends on your tarantula, but it also really depends on age, size, all sorts of things. You want to also just respect their molting cycles and their seasonal shifts too. You want to pay attention if they are in pre-molt. That will also really impact your feeding schedule. So a lot of it is like observation and really paying attention to your spider, and also just making sure that your tarantula looks nourished. I know that I see in tarantula groups all the time, people are really afraid of their tarantula looking dehydrated because we know that that can be really fatal for them, and that's something that we need to fix. But I think sometimes we can swing so far the other way in that, we want them to be really plump so they don't look dehydrated at all. And that's not necessarily the best thing either. Now, you might have a tarantula like Spidey who is just plump no matter how long they've been starving themselves. But if you have a tarantula who is overly plump that that you've been feeding them a lot, and maybe you've been feeding them things like superworms that have really high fat content, maybe you can change to something less fatty, like cockroaches. That's been really useful in regulating Spidey's appetite. Also, I think in maintaining a less plump size, I do feel like she looks less stuffed than she used to since she switched to cockroaches. So you can kind of play, a lot of it's trial and error, but it really is observing your tarantula, taking into account their size, their age, what is a good feeding schedule that doesn't allow them to put on too much size and perhaps cause some issues for them. I hope that's useful. Like I said, I do not have any direct experience with having to worry about overfeeding my tarantulas because they don't eat very much. But if you have any experience about that directly that you can share, I would love to hear about it. And I think that it would also help everybody else out who's watching. Thank you so much, guys. I will talk to you next week for Tarantula Tuesday. Bye-bye.